What is up, beautiful people? It's Wolfbrother Methos Cushionado from the channel Frost and Fist, and welcome to this Mechanicum Monday. Now, for this Mechanicum Monday, what I have for you is a basing tutorial, because I've had a few people ask me how I get my Mars bases the way that I do. And of course, a lot of it is, the Martian Iron Earth, the GW technical paint that they have specifically for making Mars bases. However, straight out of the pot, it does look good, but I wanted to elevate it a little bit. So I'm just going to be showing you how I use the Martian Iron Earth and how, I get it looking that little bit extra. So, with no further ado, let's go take a look at that tutorial. Alright, beautiful people, welcome to the table down view, as my brother Richard over at the Nerd Life always says. And that is us taking a look at these models on my desktop. Now, one thing I want you to note, all of the surfaces have been primed black, and we're going to leave them black. I want the primer because I want the adhesion to the paint, but at the same time, whereas I see a lot of other YouTubers, they like to do red or yellow or sometimes a beige color or sandy color underneath this texture paint we're going to take a look at. I actually want the black underneath, and the reason is that, to me, when you have the black showing underneath and that crackle paint starts to spread and you get those cracks in the crackle paint, I like seeing the black underneath because it just to me, it gives me the perception that the crags are really deep. It's a natural shadow underneath the crags. So I'm going to be leaving this surface black. However, if you want the other effects, like I said, some people prefer to put like a corn red down underneath, or a yellow and orange, Troll Slayer orange or something like that. Feel free to put down whatever color you want to show underneath your crackle paint. This is just how I prefer to do it. Now, the other thing we're going to do, so my Rangers here, it looks like whatever came with the box, it looks like the 25 mil bases, and these came to me already built. It's going to be hard on a 25 mil base to do my basing around something that's already been glued to the base, but these were a gift to me, and when the gift came, these were already adhesed to the bases with plastic cement, and you guys already know when you start melting the surfaces together, it's a pretty strong bond. And when I first got these models, I tried to separate them from the base to do some really neat basing, and the Skitarii are such fine, if you look at those ankles, those are such fine models, easy to snap. I honestly felt like I was going to be more likely to damage the models than I was to safely get these off their bases. So I wanted to choose a kind of basing that I could do working around these tiny bases and the low amount of space that I would have to work with. So that's why I decided to go with this Mars basing. But what I want to do is show you how I take that Mars basing from our standard Martian Iron Earth and how I take that to the next level. So I've got a blank one I'm going to show you so you can see what it's like working without trying to work around the tiny spaces of the model, but I will also do them on the models. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that these models here, any of the bases that I've done for my Mars bases that have a lot of open surface area on the floor, I want to make sure that I add a little extra detail, a little extra texture, because all that wide open space to me just says boring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little texture, some pre-texture before we put our texture paints down. So what I've got here is just a little dish of the garden pottery bits and pieces that I usually use in a lot of my stone basing. And I'm going to use that, take some of these pebbles and shavings here, these really tiny pieces, just to add a little texture and detail to my Mars bases. Breaking out the Loctite gel control glue. That's my absolute favorite super glue to work with when I'm working with models. Not sponsored, but would be sponsored. I'm sure Loctite is really worried about their modeling community. So I'm just going to pick a few places here on the base to add a little more rugged terrain. Of course, I don't want to do too much, but do want it to be kind of interesting. Now, one of the things to be careful with when you're working with this stuff is, if you're not careful, the super glue will stick this pottery to your fingers quicker than it will stick it to the model. So just kind of watch your finger placement. If you are good with tweezers to make this contact may not be a bad idea, honestly. However, I never feel like I have great control with a pair of tweezers because of my shaky hands, but that's just me. Now this blank base here, in case I do a character or something on it later on, like put an engine sear or something on it maybe. Gonna do the same thing. Now with this gel glue, you're gonna want to make sure that you put it on kind of thick before putting on the rocks to make sure you get a really strong hold. And the cool thing about gel glue is that once you get it stuck on, that gel-like property will kind of help hold it in place. Obviously your flat surfaces of the pottery are going to stick a little better to these spots. Now you'll notice I'm doing just kind of a ring around the front, or a semicircle. That's because I want to leave the middle and back of the base enough room to be able to stand up a character properly if I decide to go that route, which I think this will make a pretty cool base for an engine seer, or maybe that second tech priest I plan on getting with Forgebane. So, giving myself a little room to work with in the future there. Alright, so I've got some interesting texture on my bases now. And now we're going to break out that Martian Iron Earth, put some of that GW texture down. So, I'm going to take my Martian Iron Earth. I don't like sticking my brushes into the pot for this, so one of the things I do is I get me a little stir stick, kind of like the ones you get from Starbucks, and I like using that teeny tiny stir stick to not only get in there and get my paint mixed around, but it's a good little place for me to get out my paints and be able to work from. So, taking my brush, keeps me from getting my whole paintbrush all junked up in that whole pot of texture paint. Now, of course, you see I've got a big old glob here. That's because the more of the texture paint that you put down, the better and bigger the cracks in the texture paint is going to be. So if you're feeling a little thrifty and you only put down a thin coat, you may end up wondering why your crackle paint is not crackling. And I was experimenting with this quite a bit, even though I'd heard that before. I was experimenting a fair bit when I was building my infiltrator, or painting up my infiltrators. And I wanted to experiment around with that a little bit, and that's why some of my infiltrators have very large cracks in their bases, and why some have very small cracks in their bases. But that is absolutely fine. A little variety, a little spice of life. So you can see here, spreading it around. And I'm actually probably going to switch to a smaller brush to get between that jacket. Alright, some of the downfalls of working around a pre-painted and based model. I'm trying to switch to a smaller brush so I can try and get between that jacket and that base. Now, if you do not have super steady hands, and mine, me working in front of the camera, further away from my body, are getting super shaky right now. If you do not have super steady hands, and let's say you get some on the boots, I honestly think that's kind of fine, because it stands to reason while they're walking around this dusty Martian surface that it would probably track and build up some of this dust and gunk onto their boots, wouldn't you say? I'm going to add just a little bit more because I want a good bit of crackling up front. So we're going to dab on just a little bit more so I can get those thick areas of paint for some thick cracks and craggles. Release the craggle! If you get that reference, you're either a parent or you are just naturally awesome. Just like everything, because everything is awesome. Alright, so that's one on one of the smaller guys. Next I'm going to do up one of the bigger guys. Get a nice thick blob there because I do want to be able to leave enough of this texture paint down to create some nice thick cracks. And by the way, if you find yourself wasting some of the texture paint and getting it around the rims, you can always just take a quick second, wipe it off with your finger, then it'll easily paint over later when you do the rim of your bases in black anyhow. No big deal. Alright, so I pulled them off screen for a minute just to be able to get between the feet. I needed to kind of pull them close to my face. But that's that big one done. And now of course I'm going to switch back to my big brush. Get another nice thick layer, and we'll do this blank base too. Obviously a Mars base is almost any basing is easier to do if you have the forethought to paint it up and do your basing before you glue a model down. Again, we want to paint this on nice and thick. And just like I was saying before, I want to push this and build it up around the rocks, but I kind of like the idea of those rocks jutting out from Martian dust. Alright, so I've got the whole base covered. And now I just want some of that extra thickness for extra cracks. Alright, we got some really well built up areas here, so I think this is going to be a good texture. Alright, so it looks messy now, but I think when all this dries, it's going to make some pretty cool textures. I'm going to crack on with the rest of these guys and get their base done, and I will be back in just a few minutes. Alright, beautiful people, you can see that we are back, and I have finished putting the texture paints down on all of my bases. Now, that felt like it took a lifetime, but what really is going to take a while is that we got to do nothing. Doing nothing is always the hardest. We need to give a few hours for these bases to dry, and for me, that's usually an overnight process. So the more patient you are, the more that you allow these bases to dry fully, the better job that they're going to do in drying, creating that crackle pattern. So really, honestly, do nothing and wait. Alright guys, we're going to allow time to pass, and we will see you right back. Alright, beautiful people, so here we are back. As you can see, everything is nice and dry now. It's been several hours, and in the process of drying, you can see how gorgeous that looks. The cracks and the craggles all look great on that Mars texture. Really nice. The only problem is that it's a little one tone for me. It's a little one note. All samey. Plus, when I decided I wanted to do Mars bases, some of the battle reports that I was watching, it had more of an orangey brightness and pop to it that I really like. As you can see, this one note color here is just kind of dark and a little bland. The texture looks awesome though. But this is a great starting point. And that's why I wanted to do this tutorial, because anybody can just take the texture paint and put it on the base, but you're going to get this flat one note, which still looks good if that's what you want to do. But I want to show you how I do my bases, because I'm going to take it to another level with a little pop and a little color. Now, just to show you a couple of these. Now, see where I added the extra stones and texture on these wide open spaces of these bases? These look pretty cool. This looks genuinely like, you know, they're actually on some rocky terrain with Martian soil. Again, very nice. So I like how these came out. Take a look at my leader here. Again, the textures are very nice. Alright, so we're going to take this up a notch, right? I want to show you how I add a little color to it, and we'll crack on all of these. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Troll Slayer Orange. And a lot of the paints I use are Citadel Air, right? They're already pre-thinned. And then of course I add on even more of my airbrush thinner to try and give it an even thinner consistency. So that way, right out of the pot, I've already got things nice and watered down. Give myself a little paper palette so that way I can wipe off some excess. Now, I like wiping off some excess on a piece of paper, but I'm not going to be doing a true dry brush. This is just more of a dab. Alright, so I want to take this, and I'm just kind of dabbing some orange areas of this Troll Slayer Orange into my base here. Right, I want to drag across the surface without actually getting into the cracks and the craggles. Now, it's a little too wet for it to be a true dry brush, but we're going to be doing an actual dry brush later on. Now, where I've heard this termed before, this slightly more damp dry brushing, I've heard that referred to as overbrushing. Now, you can see here, I'm trying to get, while trying to get most of this covered, I want to be kind of patchy and inconsistent, because of course, often when we look at the ground, You know, it's not all just one uniform color, right? There are some darker patches of dirt, there are some brighter patches of dirt. So I'm actually leaving this slightly patchy and inconsistent on purpose, but I'm going to do this twice once this dries because I want some of that bright, vibrant orangey pop. So I'm going to move on to the next one while we're waiting on that one to dry. You know, definitely get some of those rocks and some of those raised areas. You know, we want that brightness and pop all over. We just don't want it super consistent. Now, of course, because my paint is so thin right now, it's going to look a little more orange when I put it on than when it actually dries. And that's absolutely fine. I don't want a super bright orange type of dirt. I just want to tone or tint the dirt that I have slightly more orange. Does that make sense? All right. And after I do this one, it'll probably be dry enough for me to go back to my original base. And start my next layer. Now you'll notice directly under their trench coat, I don't get too much because it only stands to reason that the patch of dirt right beneath their trench coat is a bit darker, right? You know, just like standing in your own shade. Oh, you can see my Transformer Steelbane here attacking the Rangers. Looks like they're getting into close combat. We don't want that. Rangers not so great in close combat, especially with the great big Autobot. Alright, so like I said, not that big of a deal. It looks a little extra orangey. It's going to dry a little more. It's going to dry a little less bright than that, but that orangey pop is definitely what I wanted. So excited about that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into fast forward mode. I'm going to do up the rest of these bases and I will be right back. Alright, beautiful people, something I want to show you. Right here, you can see a little chip where the texture paint came off while I was dry brushing. That happens from time to time. I'm just going to go back in at the end, put another little dab of texture paint, and once that dries, dry brush it again. Just try and be a little gentler than I was. Alright, beautiful people, it's on to the next color. And this one is going to be a true dry brush of Ushabti bone. Now, you may think, Wolfbrother, that color is nowhere near the other two colors that you have down. And absolutely right. I'm going to go for a little forced contrast here. I want to make sure that I get almost all of the paint off my brush. I want it to be super dry while I'm dry brushing, because I really just want a faint pickup on the edges and raised surfaces as I try and force in some contrast. I'm going to hope that pale of the Ushabti bone really highlights the edge, and it's going to add to that dusty look that I want for this base, but I think it's going to be close enough to white that it's really going to give me that pop on the edges that I'm looking for. So, starting here, and I'm barely applying any pressure at all. Very, very gentle dry brush. Again, I'm not trying to color the model, or I'm not trying to color this with Ushabti bone. I'm just going for a little forced contrast. Just like when you go to the lightest gray or the white of any stonework you're doing, right? You just want to get all of that texture accentuated by that light colored dry brush. And it really helps to pick out those details. Also, it's going to help the red of that natural texture paint and that bright orange that of the Troll Slayer orange we put on. It helps blend it all together. That is exactly what I'm looking for right there. Got some tonal separations, right? You've got some dark areas from the red, some brighter areas from the orange, that pop, and of course it's all outlined and framed nicely by the Ushabti bone. That, my friends, is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to set this one down. I'm going to go through the others, and we're going to put on some music while I fast forward this footage. Alright everyone, so that is my desired outcome. I think that looks pretty awesome on the bases. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to blacken the rim, matte it down with some matte finish, and get you guys some closing shots. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Pretty straightforward stuff, just a little bit extra on the things that I do. And as always guys, if you like this tutorial, then grab up an axe and smash that like button in the name of the Emperor. And of course, drop me some comments down below, letting me know what you guys thought of the tutorial, or letting me know how you guys do your Martian bases. And of course, if you guys are not yet subscribed to the channel, then Freak and I would love to have you as part of the pack here on the Frost and Fists. Until next time guys, stay frosty.